Oh, yeah, baby. Here we go on the Clark the Shark Show. The most astute, intoxicating, pleasure-inspiring talk radio on the internet in 2023. Of course, it's Clark the Shark, and I'm going to talk about one of the greatest albums ever recorded by one of the greatest bands of all time in rock music. Certainly one of my favorites all time. I'm talking about the album Revolution. This album is one of my favorites, but of course this group, who sadly would undergo lineup changes in the 70s, and they never quite adapted that well to moving on into the future, like many 60s bands didn't. Although I will say they had some 1970s musical hits that were interesting enough to irk my curiosity back in the day when I was just a kid, 7, 8, 9 years old. I was wondering, who was this band, this American band, but who sounded so British, so, like they're from London. And, there were people who would say that this band, Paul Revere and the Raiders, people would say they weren't a real band, or, the record company just made them up or something. I mean, you could say that about any band, even the Beatles. But this band indeed existed long before they were ever signed to any recording contracts. I mean, you could say the Beatles played Hamburg, and, they played before Brian Epstein, and there's people that say, well, when they got signed, that's when they became the Beatles. They got on Capitol, EMI, or Parlophone, whatever it was. And then you become a band. But when the Beatles became the Beatles, they had already played like 2,000 gigs. And who knows, maybe why the Beatles were so good back in the, early 60s and mid was because of they cut their teeth playing all those clubs, and the Casbah and Hamburg, and, the times when Pete Best and his mom were the managers de facto, until they had, Brian Epstein, his management, and the production of George Martin. They were slagging away like many bands did, trying to, I don't know if they were trying to make it big or just playing to make ends meet like bands do. Like Clark the Shark, once did with GE. But this band here, Paul Revere and the Raiders, when I talk about 1966, I'm talking about the Music Machine, the Standells, the Who, of course, the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, and all that, the Yardbirds. But often I fail to mention my favorite band of them all, which is, of course, this group. And this album called Revolution, which really is a revolution, you guys. This is punk rock, driving, heavy, and mixed with pop and psychedelia like only Paul Revere and the Raiders could do. These guys were an incredible band in the 60s, and often their lyrics told a story like, a little too close to the truth. They told it like it is, like on the song Kicks, which is kind of like an anti-drug song in the 1960s. I mean, that's very taboo. And Paul Revere and the Raiders had songs like that all the time that seemed to be like kind of in some weird way like Frank Zappa, not like that, but they had this anti-drug, prudent attitude. I mean, Frank Zappa wasn't like that. He was anti-drug, but him and the Mothers were they were really wild people. But Paul Revere and the Raiders seemed really straight-laced and almost like conservative or something, and yet they rocked out loud, heavy, and hard and tight. I'm talking punk rock way ahead of its time. I'm talking about a sound, you know, maybe not ahead of its time, right in its times perfectly. Just a string of top 20, top 30, top 10 hits, you guys. Paul Revere and the Raiders. But on this album, this is like their 7th album, you guys, and they were already great. And of course, this album went to another level. It got like a good review back in the day in Rolling Stone and other magazines. And reviews in 1967 were kind of a new thing. You know, they were around before, but suddenly it really mattered, you know, what Rolling Stone thought of you. And you were like, they probably wanted to hate this album and this band, Paul Revere and the Raiders, but they couldn't because it was so rocking. And these guys have such a history of being just an awesome, real band that started in the underground. They existed a long time, you know, no record deal, just self-produced, distributing, you know, their own music for a while. And then, you know, eventually they got onto, I think it was Columbia Records. And this album was produced by Terry Melcher. And of course, the son of Doris Day, I think. And he was the guy that I think Charles Manson and all of them were trying to kill, or maybe just trying to send him a message at the house on Cielo. And of course, it took many, many months for the police to figure out just who did it. And of course, they held Roman Polanski and questioned him, and they kept he might have even done some overnights in jail, as the LAPD were convinced that Roman Polanski was the guy that did it. And Terry Melcher was like this guy back in the 60s. He was kind of torn, you know, when the Manson family was threatening him. And at the same time, he was anonymously telling the police, look, I know who did it. They were after me, you know, and you know how the police are. They probably thought he was just some crazy nut until, you know, they figured out he's Doris Day's son or whatever. And then they put it all together. And, you know, that's how they caught Charles Manson and the family was when Terry Melcher was like, look, you know, these guys were sending me a message or maybe trying to kill me at Cielo or something like that. And then, of course, the cops put it all together. 4 months after the Tate LaBianca murders, of course, Terry Melcher was in hiding. But, yeah, that's how they caught Charles Manson, you guys out there, and put it all together. And I don't think Roman Polanski had a clue who did it, or maybe he did. I'm not sure. Maybe even him and Melcher together were trying to tell the police. But in any event, we're not talking about Charles Manson and his music, which the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson, he was hanging out with Manson, introducing him to Melcher and all that. And then eventually Terry Melcher was just like, you know, these guys are weird, man. They're whacked. And I don't want anything to do with this family, Dennis, and all that. And then Dennis Wilson split ties with Manson. And then I guess that's why they all got all mad at Melcher. But anyway, we're talking about the Terry Melcher produced Revolution, one of the greatest rock albums in history, you guys. by, in my view, me, Clark the Shark, your humble DJ, MC, whatever I am, your humble servant, right here from the golden EIB Sharkerphone. It's a Sharkerphone. It's not a microphone because it's solid gold, and it was given to me by Dick Clark way back in the 70s when I was only 8 years old. And Dick Clark actually said to me, "Hey, Clark the Shark, you're going to be an incredible guy on talk radio, talking about politics, talking about music, or just fucking talking about food or anything, or, you know, molecular biology or astronomy, or maybe even astromancy or astrology. Just fucking you name it. Clark the Shark talks about it, baby." Right here on the Clark the Shark show. But I'm talking about Paul Revere and the Raiders' Revolution, their 7th album. And this album influenced everybody from Iggy Pop to David Bowie to the Beatles themselves, you know, to the Who, to the Rolling Stones, to the Doors, you name it, dude. This driving punk rock band, proto-punk, but you can tell the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Damned and everybody fucking love this shit, dude. Paul Revere and the Raiders, even if they thought, you know, Paul Revere and them, you know, were kind of square, it's almost like that's irrelevant, and that doesn't even matter because these guys are so damn fucking good. And driving, their sound is just really raw, rock and roll, kind of like the Sonics, you know, that band from Seattle. Just as heavy, just as driving, just as powerful as that or anything, or the Who or anything, or the Stones, you name it, you guys. I love Paul Revere and the Raiders. I'm going to review all their albums someday. It might take me 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know, right here on the Clark the Shark show, but I will get to it. And of course, him or me. Awesome on side one, and Reno. I wish I could play you guys these songs, or YouTube will ban and delete my channel, of course, and, you know. But this is a album, Paul Revere and the Raiders' Revolution, should get 5 stars. All Music gave it 4, you guys. All Music. That's saying something. I'm sure Rolling Stone gave this a 4, maybe even a 5. But of course, Maureen, what a song. Wanting You. Oh, Upon Your Leaving. Everything on side one kicks ass here, you guys. It's amazing, you guys. I fucking love Paul Revere and the Raiders. I Had a Dream, maybe my favorite song, you guys. And of course, Tighter, awesome. Make It With Me. That sounds kind of risque and kinky for the 60s, but I don't know. Ain't nobody who can do it like Leslie can. That's even risque, and I hear a voice. This album is driving proto-punk, but I would call this punk, you guys. Even though it's from, you know, way back in the day. Recorded in 1967. Released in August of 1967. But this sounds almost like 1977, you guys. Not really, but kinda, you know. Paul Revere and the Raiders. Quite possibly Clark the Shark. My favorite band, you guys, of all the bands. I mean, I know a lot of you guys are like, Sharky, come on, they're like the Monkees. It's not a real band, you know, they're cheesy, and, you know, once in a while they get lucky and they write a hit. No way, you guys. Listen to their albums. Every single song these guys do is catchy, melodic, driving. Could be a hit, you guys. I'm not kidding. Maybe, maybe not. But when they do land on a hit, this atmospheric, kick-ass, hard rock, I would say it's punk rock, or maybe kind of influenced new wave, like maybe, I don't know, Blondie, or something, or those bands. I even get like a Oingo Boingo vibe, or I know the one guy in Oingo Boingo was from the Strawberry Alarm Clock back in the day. There could be a little missing link right there, you guys, but no, not really. Paul Revere and the Raiders, Revolution album, 1967. And this album really is a revolution, you guys, because I'm sure every band took notice of this. People stood up and listened and were like, this could be the first 70s rock. Not 70s rock, you know, like Led Zeppelin or The Who, you know, not like that. I mean, like the Ramones, or like punk rock, or I don't know, maybe like the Raspberries, or Pilot, or, you know, the Sweet, or stuff like that. It comes from Paul Revere and the Raiders, and in particular this seventh album by them, Revolution, 1967. I want you guys to go buy this album at Spotify, Amazon, iTunes. If you're only 22 years old and you were born in 2001, and you were born after 9/11, after those planes were crashed into the World Trade Center, 2 Twin Tower buildings, you don't even remember that. I want you to go buy Revolution, this album by Paul Revere and the Raiders. Get a load of me, Clark the Shark. I'm talking about 1966 all the time, how it's so fucking great and how I love it. But I failed to even mention Paul Revere and the fucking Raiders, you guys, the greatest band of them all, who later were called just the Raiders, you know. But sadly, this band could have gotten really rocking in the 70s and turned into like the MC5 or the Who or something like that, or maybe like a heavier version of the Monkees. But they didn't do it. They turned into like some cheesy show band or something, still donning the Raiders outfits, of course. But I'm kind of disappointed in them in the 70s, because even though, you know, there's still this outline of a rocking thing, I wish I would have loved to have heard the Paul Revere and the Raiders Quadrophenia or Physical Graffiti, you know, getting all serious and writing some killer fucking amazing album in the 70s and then on into the 80s, because I know punk rockers and new wavers and even heavy metal kids and everybody into rock and roll, we love this band. You know, people into Cheap Trick or Devo or, you know, just all that shit, you know. They love Paul Revere and the Raiders, you guys. No more than me, Clark the Shark. There's even kind of a bluesy Standells, you know, down and dirty garage thing about them. There's a raw energy to this band that is incredible. There is a cheesy, lame factor about them where you're like, this is fucking awful. I mean, if you don't understand it, and I say that about a lot of bands, like the Strawberry Alarm Clock. If you don't understand what they're doing and you don't intimately know the band, then you might not like it. Even if you like psychedelia or hardcore late 60s music, you know, like the Doors and all that, you might not understand certain bands if you don't really get into them and take a deeper understanding. And that is sort of true and sort of not true about Paul Revere and the Raiders. And this album, Revolution, though, will rock just about anybody, you guys, that listens to this shit. Very driving, just very kick-ass, you guys. Maureen. Wow, what a song. All of these songs, Tighter, all of them, you guys. And they had other great albums and, of course, just great songs. And in history, they get it's sad, you know, history is unfair to Paul Revere and the Raiders, you guys, right here on the Clark the Shark Show. But I'm going to tell you about them, you guys, and I want you to buy all their records, especially if you're a young person who was born in 2003 and you're only 20 years old. you were born in 2005 and you're only 18. I want you to get into Paul Revere and the Raiders, and in particular, perhaps maybe the Revolution album, because this album kicks ass, but all their music kicks ass, you guys. Every single album. Sadly, in the 70s, they were known for, like Indian Reservation and a few minor to major hits then, where the style changed, and I still like it, me, Clark the Shark. Some of you out there might not understand how they changed, and their lineup changed. They lost a lot of guys. I like to see bands hold together with all the same people, like The Who, or, maybe like the Hollies to a degree, the way the guy from Crosby, Stills and Nash, Nash comes back and comes and goes, but he always respects and reveres his stature and his standing in the Hollies almost just as much or even more than CSNY. Well, I think Paul Revere and the Raiders, it's kind of like that. I think everybody who was ever in this fraternity, they all, I think, have come and gone over the years, and they respect their time in this band. One of the greatest rock bands in the history of all rock and roll. And they've got some of the greatest rock anthems, you guys. You know them. Just tons of great hit songs by Paul Revere and the Raiders. Of course, Kicks, awesome. And their version, a lot of people don't realize the Monkees version of Steppin' Stone is really killer, as we know. But so is Paul Revere and the Raiders, you guys. It's fucking killer, too. Right here on the Clark the Shark Show, I want you to buy everything by Paul Revere and the Raiders, because I love this band, you guys. I really do. And my music with GE, The Greenhouse Effect, you could listen to She's a Bitch, Brandy, It Ain't Easy, and all my songs, even the songs with Phil Keegan, and you will hear a little bit of Paul Revere and the Raiders in anything that Clark the Shark does, or Phil, either era of GE. You can tell we love Paul Revere and the Raiders. We love Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and David Bowie and The Who. But we love this band too, you guys, as much as, we love the MC5 or the Stooges or any of that shit. We have to pay homage to the greats and admit, who the ones were at the beginning that influenced us. And perhaps the most, you guys, right here on the Clark the Shark Show from the golden EIB Sharkerphone. It's never a microphone, you guys, because it's the Wolfman Jack on crack. Clark the Shark. That's right, baby. Where my guarantee to you is you will be 113% satisfied with everything about the Clark the Shark Show. And if you're not, I will give you 98% of your shark back. I swear to God, you guys, I will. That's my guarantee to you right here on the Sharky Show. Buy this music, you guys. Paul Revere and the Raiders, especially the Revolution album, but all of them. They're all great. And I'm out of here, people. Peace.